It was 2019. Samantha Josephson was 21 years old. She was about to graduate from college and just got accepted into law school. Life was good, but what no one knew was that Samantha's life was about to end. And clues to what happened to her in those last moments were caught on video. Deadly Deep Dives. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Kimbyrleigha. If you've never been here before, nice to finally meet you. I have a lot of Valentine's Day related cases coming next week, actually. It was just the new year. It seems like 2 weeks ago, it was just the beginning of the new year. So stay tuned for that. And speaking of the new year, it's a new year. Time for trying new things. For me, I couldn't wait to try Factor. John and I have a bad habit of being strapped for time and deciding to eat at restaurants, and the expenses add up so fast. It's also not the best or healthiest for you, even though it might be quick. Factor has ready-to-eat, fresh, never frozen, nutritious meals that are delivered straight to your door, leaving you time and energy to tackle everything on your to-do list. It's super easy to heat up a Factor meal in just 2 minutes and enjoy. No driving to the grocery store, no waiting in line, and you don't need to prepare anything. I'm a vegetarian, and eating vegan or veggie is easy with Factor. Because each meal is prepared by chefs and approved by dietitians, you know that your Factor meal has all the ingredients you want and nothing you don't. And if you're looking to mix it up, you can add a protein to select vegan and veggie meals each week. Factor is now owned by HelloFresh, and with a wider array of meal plans to choose from, there's something for everyone. I love switching between the brands, and now you can enjoy both brands at a discount with me. Between researching my cases, writing my scripts, and filming, I don't have a lot of time to prepare meals. Now that I have Factor, I've been enjoying a quick meal that's healthy and gives me a boost of energy right before I film. No matter what you're doing throughout your day, if you're busy and you want to eat healthy and stick to your goals quick and easily, I recommend you head to factor75.com or click the link below and use code KIMBER50 to get 50% off your first Factor box. Thanks so much to Factor for sponsoring this video. Now let's get back into the story for today. Today I want to introduce you to Samantha Josephson. She was born August 13th, 1997 and raised in Robbinsville, New Jersey. She was the second daughter born to Marcy and Seymour Josephson. Her parents met when they were in college. Seymour was working at a supermarket that Marcy went to all the time, and Marcy would purposely use his lane when she was checking out. 2 years after Marcy first saw Seymour in that store, she was introduced to him by a friend. When they walked past the store one night, Seymour was like, "Hey, I used to work there." And that's when Marcy remembered that he was the cute guy behind the counter. I love stories like theirs. Sydney is Samantha's older sister. She was born 20 months before her, and they were very close. When Samantha was first born, Sydney would only refer to her as baby. Samantha Josephson was everybody's best friend. She got along with everyone. To her friends, she was known as Sami, and her family as Sweet Pea. Samantha was goofy, she was silly, and she was the life of the party. And although Samantha had a playful side, there was another part of her that was fiercely loyal and serious. One of Samantha's friends, Jessica, would always say that no one knew what Samantha was up to when she was exploring and playing, but she was an enormous amount of fun, and she was feisty and funny. So much so that Samantha's friends would call her silly antics Sammyisms. As a teenager, Samantha loved Justin Bieber. At one concert, she covered her face in face paint in order to catch the pop star's attention. One of Samantha's college professors described her as trying to improve daily. She was always trying to better herself. In 2015, Samantha graduated from Robbinsville High School and studied overseas in Barcelona in 2018. And she took this trip with her sister. And there are so many really awesome Facebook posts that they made together. I'm going to show you some of them up on the screen. Their parents were so proud of the fact that they were traveling together, learning together, and that they had such a close relationship. When Samantha was a child, she was interested in beauty and cosmetics, and she even considered studying cosmetology. She practiced doing her hair and her makeup, and she even did this with her mom and her sister before she decided on a completely different career path. Samantha had big dreams and big aspirations. She was determined to change the world. Whatever Samantha's future career path might have been, she wanted to make a difference. And that's when she decided she wanted to become an attorney. Since Sydney and Samantha were so close in age and only pretty much 1 year apart in school, Marcy told Samantha to take everything in that she could from the schools that her sister was visiting. From New Jersey, the family flew to South Carolina to tour the University of South Carolina. While Sydney ultimately chose to go to another university, the school made a very strong impression on Samantha. Samantha knew this is the college that she was going to attend after she was done with senior high school. And no one was surprised when she received her acceptance letter to the University of South Carolina the following year. Marcy and Seymour were initially reluctant because they didn't want to send their daughter so far away. She was born and raised in New Jersey. She was a Jersey girl. But they discussed it in depth, and having lived in the Northeast her whole life, Seymour knew that the South was different from the Northeast. He felt like Samantha had to take a new journey, especially as a Jewish woman. He thought it would be good for her to be in a world that was completely different than the one that she already knew. Marcy and Seymour also worried about their daughter's safety. What parent doesn't these days, especially when they're sending their children off to college in another state? But they agreed that the University of South Carolina was likely safer than a large city school, and they were happy that Samantha wanted to be there. The University of South Carolina is a public research university located in Columbia, South Carolina. It was established over 200 years ago. There are over 300 bachelor's, master's, and doctoral degree programs that are offered at USC. It's actually the largest university in the state, with business, engineering, law, and medical schools on its Columbia campus. Among the university's renowned traditions are sports and Greek life. Gamecocks are the university's mascot and the name of its sports team, which are roosters bred to fight. The university's varsity teams all compete at Division I level in the NCAA. Approximately 30% of the University of South Carolina student body is involved in fraternities and sorority life. Marcy and Seymour dropped Samantha off at the University of South Carolina on her 18th birthday, and she acclimated immediately. She was having the time of her life. And it was nerve-wracking for Samantha's parents because their child was so far away. New Jersey was a 12-hour drive, or a pretty expensive plane ride away. And Marcy and Seymour would not be able to reach Samantha immediately if she needed something or if something were to happen to her. They could only hope that they had prepared Samantha for the real world, and Marcy and Seymour did. Samantha was a bright, responsible girl. During her first year of college, Samantha's entire family traveled to South Carolina to come see her. It was on Parents' Weekend. They watched a football game, they had a great time together, and Sydney said it was really great to see her sister so comfortable at this university. Samantha was proud to show her parents and her sister her dorm room and her school. She fit in perfectly. While Samantha was enrolled at the University of South Carolina, she joined Alpha Gamma Delta, which is a sorority on campus. It was founded on May 30th, 1904 at the University of Syracuse in New York, and their mascot is a squirrel, and their colors are red, light brown, and green. The sorority's charity focuses on fighting hunger, and there are over 201,000 members in the over 199 college chapters and more than 250 alumni chapters across North America. So being in the sorority was kind of a big deal for Samantha. By her senior year, she was living in a place called The Hub, with some of her closest friends, Carly, Jordan, and Jenny, and her best friend, Tegan Berry. The Hub is a really nice off-campus housing building, and let's take a look. Okay, this place is very nice. My college definitely didn't have anything like this. Wow. And the way that it's advertised on the site is just so inviting. There's a spa, a gym, a nice big pool. I mean, look at this. It looks like they even have a projector to play movies while you swim. That's awesome. There's a real sand volleyball court, plus lots of places to tan and hang out. It was perfect for Samantha and her roommates. On the site, it also says it's luxury living in a college town. They boast a pool and sun deck, work and study areas, technology and security, and lots of activities for students. They even have VIP apartments, and that gives you a lot more amenities like a private hot tub, wow, walk-in closets, pretty awesome, and it looks like they've just thought of everything. Look at this virtual tour video. I want to live there. It's like, take my money. There's hammocks, a pool table. This place is so cool. And they go up to 5 bedrooms. I mentioned Samantha's roommate and close friend Tegan. Well, they really hit it off, both being from New Jersey. Tegan is from Clinton, New Jersey, and she did 1 year of community college before transferring to USC. And she was set to graduate the very same year as Sami in 2019. Tegan's friend and roommate, Jacqueline, was also transferring to USC, and her older brother went there. So she knew him, of course, as well as some of his friends. And Jacqueline was the one that ended up introducing Tegan to Sami, Carly, Jordan, and Jenny. And Tegan became very good friends with Sami. They lived together at the Hub their senior year. Tegan thought of Sami as caring, compassionate, easygoing, and goofy. They'd hang out all the time. They'd go to football games, they'd eat together, go out to bars, everything. They went to a popular college party area that's in town called 5 Points, and they went there very often, and they were very familiar with this area. This is a small area consisting of bars and restaurants in Columbia, South Carolina. It's only a 3-minute drive from the university, which makes it an ideal place for students to grab a bite to eat or have a few drinks or hang out with their friends when they're not in class. The main street in the middle of 5 Points is called Hardin, and it's right here on the map. There's all kinds of fun places to go for food, like Home Team Barbecue, this sushi place, where you'd probably find me, Blue Pizza, Breaker's Bar and Grill, and then there are bars like the 5 Point Saloon, Rooftop Bar, and the Bird Dog, as well as a whole bunch of cute shops, clothing stores, smoke shops, fast food. It's got it all. It's perfect for college students, and it's only a 7-minute drive from the Hub, which is ideal for the girls. Aside from making many close friends, Samantha also had a boyfriend at the University of South Carolina. His name is Greg Corbishley. As a matter of fact, the two of them met at 5 Points. He's from Charleston, South Carolina, where he graduated from high school and eventually ended up attending South Carolina University. He was a year ahead of Samantha. And he and Samantha met one night when they were out having fun at the bars in 5 Points, and they really just hit it off. They started talking, and the friendship ended up evolving into more of a seeing each other type thing. They were really just enjoying each other's company for about a year until they officially became girlfriend and boyfriend in the spring of 2017. And they did everything together. They were in constant contact, even more than the average couple. They only lived 5 minutes apart, and they would be FaceTiming each other all the time, checking in, and they'd hang out almost every day, going to restaurants, bars, football games. They were in love, and they just wanted to spend all of their time together. Greg was studying marketing with a minor in sports management, and he did end up graduating from USC in 2018. Samantha was a political science major with aspirations of going to law school. She was expected to graduate in the spring of 2019. And by 2019, Samantha and Greg had been dating for 2 years, and they were happy together. They were even planning on moving close to one another. They just wanted to wait to see what would happen after Sami graduated. The next step was law school. So Greg was currently living back in Mount Pleasant, South Carolina, but he would come see Samantha on a regular basis, even though it was like a 2-hour drive. I think it was 120 miles away. Although Samantha did not want her senior year at University of South Carolina to end, she knew it was time to begin preparing for law school. She applied to Rutgers University in New Jersey and Drexel University in Philadelphia. Samantha ended up being awarded a partial scholarship from Rutgers University and a full scholarship from Drexel. Despite liking what both schools had to offer, Samantha found it really hard to turn down a full scholarship to one of the country's top 40 premier research institutions. And as a result, Samantha chose to enroll at Drexel University in the fall of 2019. And like I mentioned, Drexel is located in Philadelphia. So once Greg knew that Sami chose Drexel, their plan after graduation, due to the difficulty of law school, would be that Greg was going to move to Philadelphia and look for work. And they would not live together, but they would be close enough so that they could still spend a lot of time together and see each other whenever they could. Law Student Acceptance Day was held in Philadelphia, and Samantha was flown there by the university. Her whole family met her there. And afterward, Seymour, Marcy, Sydney, and Samantha enjoyed their day at a winery. They spent a lot of time together celebrating and getting excited about Samantha's future. And I love this picture of them. They look so happy. And they were happy. On March 25th, 2019, Samantha Josephson returned to the University of South Carolina. Samantha only had 1 month to go before she graduated from college. It was a joyous time. She and her friends were ready to celebrate. They decided that they were going to take a break from their studies on Thursday, March 28th, and go hang out at 5 Points. Thursdays was like Fridays for them because they only took classes from Monday to Thursday. And no matter where they started the night, every student seemed to somehow end up at 5 Points. and after a night of partying, the typical way to get home was good old Uber. The plan was that the girls would pregame at the hub, go to their friend's house to park their car. It's close to 5 Points, only a few minutes walk, and they'd hang out at the bars and take an Uber back to the hub. Typical night. That day, Greg was in Mount Pleasant, South Carolina. He started his day going over to his brother's house. He was looking after his dog because he had to work. The March Madness games were happening that night, so he was watching them around 7:30 p.m. But Greg was in constant contact with Samantha the entire day as usual. They FaceTimed together, called each other, texted, but Samantha really wanted him to come visit her that night. Her and her roommates, they had already started pre-gaming before they headed out, and she was still begging Greg to make that drive and come hang out with her. That day, she had actually confided in Greg about a family member that found out some medical issues, and she was not in a very good headspace mentally. She was upset. So Greg told her, you know what? Get your mind off everything. Just go out, enjoy some time with your friends. She had just worked really hard to get into law school. He told her she deserved to just have a carefree night, have fun, and celebrate. The NCAA game had just ended, so Greg headed out to the gym around 9:30 p.m. And he talked to Samantha a couple times while he was at the gym. She was still trying to convince him to come out that night. If he had, maybe things would have been different. But like I said, it was a 2-hour drive. And though he usually did say yes, this particular night he didn't want to because she was supposed to come see him 2 days later. They had plans for her to go up there to Charleston. They had a whole entire trip planned out. So it really didn't make sense for him to go all the way there just for her to be coming all the way back a couple days later. And it was also getting late. Greg got home from the gym around 11:30 p.m. And at this point, Samantha was still asking him to come out that night. Her and her friends were heading to their friend Edgar's house, which was only 2 minutes away from 5 Points. Everything was going as planned. They left Edgar's and they walked straight to the Bird Dog Lounge. They got there around 12:15 a.m. and that was their go-to place. They had really cheap drinks. It was just a typical normal bar. They were listening to music, talking, laughing, hanging out. Everyone's just enjoying each other's company. They had gone to the Bird Dog numerous times before this, and Samantha and Greg were in contact throughout the night. Just small talk via text about who was there, what she was doing, just casual conversation. After hanging out with her friends until about 2 a.m., Samantha decided she wanted to call it a night. Although the bars closed around 3, Samantha had to work. She worked at Liberty Tap Room, and she had to be there the next day around 11 o'clock. And she was punctual and diligent about her work. So for this reason, Samantha found herself waiting on an Uber outside of 5 Points around 2 a.m. Her dad had given her his credit card number because he wanted to make sure that anytime she needed a ride home, she could easily call an Uber. She didn't have to worry if there was no money in her account. He didn't want her to take any chances driving with someone who had been drinking or hitchhiking home or trying to walk home in the middle of the night. And that made sense. Because Greg and Samantha were dating long distance, they decided to install this app called Find My Friends on their phones to make sure that they both got home safely when they weren't together. All of their friends also had this app installed, and it was super common for them to track each other to make sure they were safe. I do this with my friends and family and my boyfriend as well. I just use the Find My iPhone app, but the Find My Friend app is very precise, like up to the second. For example, if you're in a car, you can actually see it moving. After Samantha told Greg that she was leaving the Bird Dog Lounge to catch an Uber, he wanted to ensure that she got home safely, so he began to track her on the Find My Friends app. As Greg watched, he noticed that Samantha was traveling in the opposite direction of her apartment complex. She was going south of the Bird Dog. As you can see on this map, this is where the Bird Dog is, and this is where Samantha was supposed to be headed back home. At first, when he saw this, he really didn't think much of it. He figured, okay, maybe she's going back to Edgar's. He didn't even know, maybe she was with someone, a friend, but he kept tracking her phone and it was still going in the wrong direction. At this point, Greg was thinking, is Samantha mad at me? Maybe she's going somewhere and she didn't want Greg to know. So he texted her, but he didn't get an answer. So he called. Again, no answer. When he tried to call again, it went straight to voicemail. That's when he noticed that his text messages were marked delivered, but not read. And they both always had read receipts on. Samantha read his messages. There wasn't a time she didn't. Either she was purposely not opening his texts or she couldn't for some reason. So at this point, Greg was worried. He thought there might be something more serious going on. This would be absolutely terrifying to me. Not being able to get a hold of someone that I'm close to, that I care about, that I love, I would be worried sick. Greg then attempts to contact her on Snapchat and she didn't answer there either. But what's even more terrifying is when he goes back to the app, he can no longer track her location. It's stopped. That had never happened, not even once, in their entire relationship, never. So what's going on? This is around 2:30, 2:40 in the morning, and the last place her phone tracked was at Montgomery Avenue. And this is in Rosewood, which is pretty far out of the way from where she was supposed to be headed. And at this point, he wasn't sure what to think. He thought, okay, maybe she left her phone in an Uber and it was just tracking where the driver was going. Greg just kept calling and calling to see if she would eventually pick up, but she didn't. It was time to dig deeper. He wanted to know what was going on. So Greg contacted Samantha's roommate and best friend, Tegan, and he sent her a screenshot showing where Samantha's phone had last been tracked, in Rosewood, a suburb of Columbia. After talking to Greg, Tegan pulls up the Find My Friend app and she sees that her app tracks Samantha to the same location that Greg mentioned. So she and her other friends decided they're going to go to that location and look around. They're looking on the grass, they're looking on the road. They don't see any sign of her phone or any sign of Samantha. They're still not able to get in contact with her, so eventually they decide to go back home to the hub. When they get there, Samantha was not there when they arrived. The room to her door was actually still open, and her bedroom was empty. Her bedroom was before Tegan's down a hall, so Tegan had to pass it on the way to hers, and she noticed Samantha's work shoes were still outside of her room. She knew that Samantha had to work the next day, so she kind of took note of that. And then she proceeded to go to her room and go to bed, still assuming that Samantha just maybe left her phone in an Uber, even though Samantha was not home at this late hour of the night into the early morning, not answering any of their calls or texts, and her phone was no longer tracking after going in the totally opposite direction from home. I personally would not be able to sleep that night, but I don't want to judge what a particular person was going through because I have no idea. It's never happened to me. But that's how Greg felt. He couldn't sleep. Throughout the night, Greg called and texted Samantha. And after convincing himself that he was freaking out for no reason, he decided to try to get some sleep. A restless sleep at that. But he told himself Samantha would call him the next day. And it was probably a big misunderstanding and they would have a hilarious laugh about it. And there was probably a story behind everything. And it was going to be just fine. That's what Greg hoped. He finally got to bed somewhere between 5 and 5:30 that morning. That same morning, though, hours later, Friday, March 29th, Tegan wakes up. It's around 10:30, and when she comes out of her room, she sees Samantha's shoes. And Samantha's door is still open. Samantha is not there. And that's when she really became concerned. She starts a group chat with all the roommates via text, and they come out to the living room and they start to come up with a plan. Around 11 o'clock in the morning, Greg wakes up to his phone ringing. He had missed 3 calls already from Samantha's roommates, and the phone was ringing again. It was Carly. She informed him that Samantha was still not at the apartment, and they were getting very concerned. After talking to Samantha's roommates, Greg immediately got into his car and started driving towards Columbia. Samantha's roommates called the local hospitals, and Greg just made his way down there to help them. Her roommates even went back to Montgomery Avenue, but they still didn't see any signs of Samantha. At this point, they called the jail, the police station. They wanted to check if maybe she literally got arrested the night before, and that's why she couldn't have access to her phone. At that point, they also believed they had to wait 24 hours before reporting somebody missing. That is not true, but that's what they thought. So they were just kind of conducting their own research until they finally called the police. They went back to the apartment, and that's when they decided to try her laptop to see if they could get into it, and they did. They were able to get into her email account, and they go to the most recent messages, and they locate a message from Uber, and it's a receipt from the night before. It showed that Samantha had requested an Uber to pick her up from 5 Points around 2 a.m. But get this, the ride was canceled. Not by Samantha, but by the driver. They see the $5 cancellation charge. The driver stated that Samantha never showed up. The car she was supposed to get picked up in was a charcoal color Dodge Charger. After discovering what they found on Samantha's laptop, they called Greg in a panic. With no other option, Greg decides to finally call Seymour and Marcy in New Jersey to let them know their daughter is missing. Greg called Marcy first. She was out having lunch with a friend, and he told her nobody had been able to contact Samantha since the night before when she was at the Bird Dog Lounge at 2 o'clock in the morning. Marcy hangs up the phone in a panic, and she calls her husband. This is her and her husband's worst nightmare. She asked Seymour if he had heard from Greg, and he says no. Why? She said Greg had just called and said Samantha was missing, and he's like, what do you mean? So she explained that she hadn't come back the previous evening, and Seymour told Marcy to get home right away because they're driving to South Carolina. I don't know why they didn't just fly, because it is a 10-hour drive. But Samantha's sister Sydney received that phone call from her father as well. It was around 1:20 p.m. in the afternoon, and he told her to get home immediately. When Sydney asked why, her dad said that her sister was missing. But Sydney couldn't understand why her parents were freaking out so badly. Samantha's phone probably just died, and Sydney thought she was fine. But Seymour insisted that Sydney get home now. When she finally did reach home in Robbinsville, New Jersey, Seymour and Marcy already started their 10-hour drive to Columbia, South Carolina. So while Seymour and Marcy were traveling there, Greg was arriving there. And by this time, he and Samantha's friends reported her missing to the police, and they all started to search for her themselves. Officer Amanda Moskaitis came out to the Hub Apartments, and she was the one that took the missing persons report that day. It was around 1 o'clock in the afternoon. She took all of their information, and then she started calling places. She did reach out to Liberty Tap Room, and they were able to confirm that Samantha had not shown up for work that day. While she's sitting there writing up the report, she's approached by Greg. He had just arrived, and he also provided her with information. That is when the officer was able to confirm that none of the roommates nor Greg had heard from her since the night before. And she got in touch with Samantha's parents, and they let her know that they did not know where she was. They had not heard from her either, and that they were on their way there. She also obtained a photo of Samantha from Tegan. They wanted this for a BOLO report, and this was sent out to the public and to the Columbia Police Department. After the officer left, Greg and Samantha's roommates decided to go back to the Rosewood area again, where Samantha's phone last pinged, and they knocked on doors. They went around the whole town. They wanted to see if anyone had heard or seen anything suspicious the night before, but no one had. They did the same thing they did before. They looked at the roads and the grass. They were really looking everywhere for Samantha's phone, but there were no clues left behind at that location. Everyone was also making social media posts. They were begging their friends to share information about Samantha in case anyone had heard from her or seen anything the night before. And the word was traveling fast. The campus was buzzing. Students were scared. Everyone was wondering what could have happened in their close-knit college community. But they were holding on to hope. They were praying that Samantha would turn up. Some of her friends, like the family friend I told you about, her name is Jessica, she actually found out that Samantha was missing from Instagram. And I cannot imagine opening an app and seeing a bunch of posts about someone that I know. It's terrifying. But this became reality for friends like Jessica. She immediately jumped out of a business meeting to call her mother and ask her, is this true? Is Samantha really missing? And her mom did give her the devastating news that Samantha's mom and dad were already on their way to South Carolina, and that Jessica should probably come home from work. It's almost like they just had this feeling that this was not going to turn out well. The drive for her parents seemed to drag on for an eternity, even though Seymour was going over 80 miles an hour, and they were in constant contact with the police department. They were looking for updates minute by minute, as many as they possibly could get. This trip just could not go by fast enough. They wanted to get there. They wanted to find their daughter. Back in South Carolina, Samantha's friends go down to the Five Points area. Now they're going to different establishments and asking the managers if they could look at the surveillance videos that they had. They wanted to see if they could spot Samantha. They wanted to see if she got into a car, and if she did, what did it look like? Did she walk somewhere? They wanted anything they could get that would guide them in a direction to find her. They went to a place called the Breakers because it had a pretty big view of Main Street, but they didn't have anything for them. And after that, they visited the Bird Dog Lounge. This is where Samantha's friends saw her last. When they reached the bar, Greg talked to the owner and asked if they could view the CCTV footage from the previous evening. They explained how their friend had gone missing, and they wanted to track her movements and see if she got into someone's car. The bar owner recognized Samantha's friends and knew they were in distress. So he let them see the surveillance footage. The owner brought them into a room filled with screens. and Greg pointed out the camera that pointed towards the street where the Uber drivers typically pick people up. It's right here in this area under this tree. This is where everyone in that area knows to stand so that their Uber can quickly stop and you can jump in and head out. As Greg and Samantha's roommates are reviewing the videos, they see Samantha. They see her enter the bar at 12:43 a.m. Since they knew her so well and she was wearing a bright colored shirt that night, it was easy for them to spot her in the footage. She was wearing a reddish-orange top, black jeans, platform sandals, and a white bralette. Samantha could be seen drinking, dancing, and having a great time at the Bird Dog. She appeared to be acting completely normal. Greg asked the owner if he could fast forward the footage to about 1:50 a.m. That's when Samantha was on the phone walking out of the Bird Dog and she called for an Uber. They watched closely. They saw Samantha outside the Bird Dog and they wanted to see if she was being followed. But everything seemed perfectly fine, and I'm going to be showing you all of this footage. Here's Samantha. She comes out of the bar. She's standing in the designated Uber area or Lyft area, the ride share portion of the sidewalk that everyone goes to. This is where cars know to come pick up the patrons. And nothing seems out of the ordinary. There's no creepy person following her. There's no one even near her. She's just standing there alone, waiting for her ride. At one point, a gray sedan pulls up, and as you see, it's kind of slowing down in front of that rideshare area. Samantha walks forward, she reaches for the door, but then the car drives away. The Uber either didn't see her or it wasn't actually her Uber. And to be fair, she had been drinking, so it's not uncommon for you to get a little confused. There's a lot happening, lots of cars going by, lots of people outside. But then at 2:12, a black four-door sedan pulls right into this little handicap spot right under the tree. And once again, she steps off the curb, walks towards the vehicle, reaches out to open the back passenger's door. And this time she was able to open the door and she gets into the vehicle. However, her friends know the Uber canceled. So was this the Uber? Did she get inside and then the driver canceled the trip and kidnapped her? It was so hard to watch this footage, especially since I know what's going to happen. After the traffic cleared, the video captured the car pulling out of that parking spot and then driving off. Greg and Samantha's roommates felt sick to their stomachs. They knew that Samantha's Uber ride had canceled. And they knew it was supposed to be a charcoal gray Dodge. If Samantha's Uber was truly canceled, then whose car did she get into? Had she called someone else? There's just a series of crazy scenarios that begin to play out in Greg's head, and they'd be playing out in mine as well. Whoever drove away with Samantha, Greg hoped they had not hurt her. He immediately contacted the Columbia Police Department, and he informed them about what he saw on that disturbing CCTV footage. Investigator Chris Odom from the Columbia, South Carolina Police Department led the investigation into the dark vehicle that Samantha entered. She contacted a company called Statewide Security, and they have cameras throughout the Five Points area. So they requested the footage for the specific time that Samantha was outside the bar. Statewide Security had video of the parking lot that was next to the Bird Dog Lounge. And I have this footage. From this angle, it shows Samantha standing outside the bar, but there was something unsettling about this recording. As the investigator watched, she noticed that in the 15 minutes prior to Samantha entering that black Chevy Impala, it had circled the Bird Dog Lounge a number of times. The driver of this vehicle would stop for long periods of time, which was strange, then drive around, make U-turn after U-turn to come back to that area where these Ubers typically picked people up. It was though they were scouting for people, they were stalking, waiting. At one point in the video, investigator Odom noticed that the driver of the Chevy Impala was positioned in that parking lot that I showed you in a way that would give them a clear view of Samantha. She was directly in their line of sight. She was clearly looking for her Uber, and the person driving that Impala was able to see her try to get into the gray car before he decides to pull around and pull into that spot. And this investigator noticed that the driver was so eager to get to Samantha, he actually jumped the curb to get into that parking spot. It was like a shark circling its prey. As investigator Odom examined the video closely, she recognized Samantha entering the car at 2:09. Then she pulled up other video surveillance from this same security company and was able to track the vehicle. She also tried to zoom in so she could see details, but she could never actually make out who was driving. She couldn't see their face or any details about who they were. She did notice, however, that they were sitting pretty far back, like reclined in their seat. That was apparent, and you can see it right here if you look clearly. The chair, the actual seat of the car, is leaned back, and I will outline the line right here of where it is. As far as she could tell, no one else was in the car except for this driver and Samantha. However, whoever was driving that car was the main suspect in Samantha Josephson's disappearance at this point. The investigator doesn't think it would have taken Samantha that long to realize her driver was not headed in the right direction. She also believed that the driver had to engage the child locks, and that was what was preventing Samantha from opening the door or rolling down the windows. Having realized she was trapped, Samantha must have felt so helpless. That is absolutely terrifying. Investigator Odom tracked the vehicle throughout 5 Points, and although the investigator searched as long as she could, the last place she could locate the car in the CCTV footage was about 1.5 miles away. And after the vehicle left that area, there were no longer cameras on the streets to record it. Based on the footage, investigator Odom concluded that Samantha was picked up in a late model Chevy Impala, black in color, and immediately issued an updated bolo. However, the investigator could not determine the license plate number of that vehicle. The Columbia Police Department enlisted the assistance of SLED. It's the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division. SLED Lieutenant Kristen Grant received a call from her captain telling her that she was needed in Columbia to assist the Columbia, South Carolina Department. Lieutenant Grant interviewed Samantha's roommates once again and her boyfriend, and she asked them to explain everything that happened from when they last heard from Samantha. Tegan told her the last time she remembers seeing Samantha was in the corner of the Bird Dog Lounge, and she was on her phone, and it wasn't uncommon for the group to kind of split up. Once they got there, they would have other friends to talk to, and it was common for them to leave their little group at different times of the night and even go home at different times of the night. Whenever they felt like they had enough, they would just call it a night and leave. Tegan had no idea that Sami was no longer at the bar until Greg contacted her later. It also wasn't out of the ordinary for Greg to reach out to her and others in the group if he was trying to get a hold of Samantha. After talking to Greg, she explained she pulled up the Find My Friend app and she sees the location where Samantha last tracked to. And it was the same one that Greg had mentioned, so she talks about how they went out to that location, but they didn't see any signs of her there, and no one was able to contact her for the rest of the night. While the Columbia PD and SLED searched for Samantha and the vehicle that drove away with her, Marcy and Seymour sped down to South Carolina. Samantha's parents were keeping in touch with investigators as they made their way there. They wanted to learn as many details as they could. A few hours into this 10-hour journey, investigator Odom called Seymour to ask what their ETA was. After that phone call, Odom called Seymour and Marcy again and asked them, what time do you think you're going to be in South Carolina? She told them when they did arrive, they needed to head straight to the police station as soon as they got in town. Seymour did not have a good feeling about this. He literally turned his face away from his wife and he started to curse under his breath. His daughter was in trouble and he just had this feeling that this would not end well. Parents do end up having gut feelings. Sometimes they just know things. Meanwhile, across town, out in the country, about an hour away from Columbia, 25-year-old Andrew Lee was turkey hunting with his buddy Ryan out in this area called New Zion, which he had done many times. Ryan's family had land in New Zion, so they hunted there quite a bit since it's close to his house and there's easy access. So they arrived around 1:30 in the afternoon and they went to a dirt road called Black Bottom Road. Then they went down to a farm road. This is sort of like an access road that's not on the main road. And Ander was using binoculars to scan the area for turkeys. He was walking down there for about 5 to 10 minutes, but it was when he turned back around to head towards Black Bottom Road again, and he was looking in those woods, that something caught his eye. To the left, he saw something, and he couldn't really make out what it was. He kept looking, and the more he did, the more he began to realize it looked like a body. And that's when he called his friend down there. They're both standing there looking in total disbelief. They didn't want to believe what they were looking at. Obviously, neither one of these men expected to see anything like that. They were in the middle of nowhere. It's not somewhere you just end up. It's somewhere you would deliberately go. It's just farmland and woods as far as the eye can see. For example, this nearest store is where the pin is on the map. This is far from town. So they weren't exactly sure if it was a body, but they knew it looked like it, and they didn't want to go any closer. There were a lot of dense trees, and one of them was uprooted and it was blocking their view. But they were just a few feet away, and they were certain they were looking at a deceased human being just lying there lifeless in the woods. So at this point, they know they need a call for help, but they don't know how to relay their location to authorities. They don't want to lose this spot. So instead, they call a man that they know named Mr. Bubba Morris. He actually works for the Department of Natural Resources, and he's very familiar with this area. They call Ryan's dad to get Bubba's number, and once they call Bubba, he was out there within 10 minutes. Bubba goes down, he looks at what they're looking at, and he calls law enforcement, and they waited for them to arrive. They never went closer to the body. This is an area where you don't see random traffic. When you do see someone, it's someone you know. It's a local. People who live in this area hunt and hang out in this area. It's not uncommon for people to grab some beers and guns and head out into these woods to hunt. Have a few cigarettes, talk. Kids ride their four-wheelers in this area. They have little get-togethers. So when Mr. Morris got there, he parked. He walked down to where the guys were standing, and from about 25 feet away, he could clearly see clothing on what looked like a human body. None of these men want to get any closer. They were only trying to confirm what they were seeing. And once it was confirmed, in their minds at least, they called in the sheriff. This area that they're in is known as sort of a lover's lane, if you will. And Mr. Morris, ever so often, has to go down there and break up kids being kids, hanging out, drinking, doing what teenagers do. But these aren't random kids, like I said. Never in 26 years of him working in DNR has he stopped someone that wasn't from this area. So he does immediately call law enforcement. Sheriff Thomas Huckabee was the officer notified to go to the scene. He parked his vehicle up on that main dirt road and walked down to where the guys were standing, eventually making his way towards what was believed to be a body. And once he was close enough, he was able to confirm that it was indeed a deceased female. So he calls his supervisor to let him know. However, when Officer Huckabee went back to the station, he's looking through missing persons reports and he realizes something. There was a female that appeared to look like the body that he saw. So he brought this to the sheriff's attention. It was the clothing that she was wearing and the ones that were described in the bolo that matched what Huckabee saw. The woman also looked very out of place for that area. It looked as though she had been dumped there, not that her death had occurred there. That is when he alerted the CPD that their missing person may be the woman he found in the woods. Going to get a lot more interesting from here. Lieutenant Todd Schenk from SLED was one of the first crime scene investigators on this scene. As he walked down the main dirt road, he did not see a body. It wasn't until he got to the footpath that the body was visible. I'm going to show you this and blur the body so you can understand exactly where she was found. She was laying sort of on her side with her left arm underneath her body, and her right arm was laid across her chest near her left hip. And they could distinctively see a broken pair of platform sandals. One of them was still attached by the ankle strap, but it was no longer across her toes. Her shirt had been pulled up towards her head, and there was a drawstring that was on her shirt that was past her head. It was apparent that this woman had been stabbed. There was a very large amount of blood on the victim, and wounds could be seen all over her body. At first glance, without further inspection, there were visible wounds to her head, her shoulder, her right hand, her right leg, her neck, her back, and her right foot. They begin to look around because they're trying to ascertain whether the struggle and the killing happened at this location or elsewhere. They're looking for a knife or blood around the area. But based on where she was, how she was laying, and the lack of blood evidence at this scene, other than on her body, they determined that the altercation did not happen at this area, and that she was left at this location after her death. They don't touch or manipulate the body until the coroner gets on scene and gives them permission to do so. So until he gets there, the investigators are taking photos, they're documenting what they see, and when that coroner arrived, they continued their investigation by rolling the body over and looking at her back. And it was apparent that there were drag marks on her back, on her arms. She was dragged through the brush and the dirt on her back. They also look at her fingernails. They take fingernail scrapings to check for DNA that may exist underneath, and that's when they notice her fingernails were an area of interest. They looked ripped or broken or cut or torn. They did not look normal. They did not look right. It almost looked like someone had deliberately cut her fingernails off with some kind of instrument so that maybe something wouldn't be found underneath. They also take a buccal swab from her cheek to get a sample of her DNA, which they now call a known DNA sample. Since they know it's hers, they can now compare it to any other DNA that they find. They also take her fingerprints and her footprints for the same reason, to rule them out when they find a crime scene, if they do. They also brought out their ALS, which is an alternative light source. This is a light that has a different wavelength than white light. Think about black lights. It enables them to see blood, bodily fluids, fibers, and bruises that cannot be seen with the naked eye. And when the victim was on the stretcher, they used the ALS to see a number of bruises on her sides, on various areas throughout her entire body. And there was also an earring that was in her right ear, but the one on the left was missing. So they ran a metal detector over the area to attempt to locate it, but they were not successful. And I thought this was something they did above and beyond. I said, that is so respectful to the victim to go looking for a missing earring, but I come to find out this is actually common practice. I had just not heard about it in any of the other cases that I've covered. Although DNA testing would be required to confirm their findings, they do conclude that the body they found was that of Samantha Josephson. It was because she was dressed in the same clothes that Samantha had worn to the Bird Dog Lounge the night before. A couple hours earlier, Greg was the first to arrive at the police station. He was taken into a room with investigators. They were grilling him, asking him a bunch of questions. It had been 24 hours since Samantha had gone missing. When he was done with that interview, they escorted him to the main lobby, and he was surprised because all of Samantha's roommates were waiting there. He had no idea. And once they were all together, they escorted all of them into a conference room. And when they get in there, they're surprised again. That's where they see Mr. and Mrs. Josephson just sitting there looking sad and distraught. Seymour and Marcy had arrived in Columbia and headed straight to the police station as they were told to do. And after getting there, officers led them into that same large meeting room. They looked around, and that's when they noticed there was a man, and they looked at his jacket and they saw the word coroner embroidered on the back. It was obvious to them that they were not going to get good news. They were going to get news that their daughter was no longer alive. And the investigators confirmed that even though they don't have the DNA results yet, they found a body that matched Samantha's description. Greg broke down. He fell to his knees and he actually blacked out. He was in such shock and disbelief. And Seymour and Marcy were just beside themselves. Seymour had to make the hardest phone call he ever had to make to his daughter Sydney in New Jersey. He said that hearing Sydney's screams and not being able to be there for her hurt him, and it still does. When Seymour called her, she was waiting for their call at a neighbor's house. And as the neighbor answered the phone, Sydney saw her drop to the ground in tears, and she rushed to that phone because she wanted to hear it for herself. She already knew. She just wanted to hear it directly from him. She also heard her mother screaming in the background as he was telling her what had happened. Sydney began to hyperventilate. She felt like she couldn't breathe. And for her parents, not being with her at that time was just so difficult. Marcy wasn't sure if it was a good idea that Sydney remained at home. But at that moment, she just knew she wished she could be there to hold her. An investigator with SLED, Lee Blackman, said that they needed a lead to move this investigation forward. He stepped out of that police station, and this man said a prayer because he feared that he would not be able to solve this case. It was then that he was told to return to 5 Points because they had just pulled somebody over that was driving a dark-colored Chevy Impala. Every police officer in this city had been searching for a dark-colored Chevy Impala for 24 hours. Since they got that bolo, they were looking. Canine handler Jeffrey Kraft patrolled that area near Samantha's last sighting that evening, and before his shift, he had looked repeatedly at that footage of Samantha. Her entering that vehicle, he watched it time and time again. and he was diligently searching the streets looking for that car. Officer Kraft began his patrol in Rosewood in that community, and he started the shift Friday evening at 6 p.m., and his shift stretches into Saturday early morning. After driving around in that Rosewood neighborhood and up and down the streets for hours, he found nothing. Officer Kraft then decides to drive back to Five Points, and within seconds of pulling toward the border of the town, the officer spots a black Chevy Impala. It matched the description of the car that Samantha got in. It was going down that main street, Hardin, towards Blossom Street, right here where this red star is on the map. Officer Kraft got behind the Impala at this point, and he followed it towards 5 Points. The car got into the left lane to take a left turn on Blossom Street. This is just 2 blocks away from the Bird Dog, roughly 800 feet. Officer Kraft flashed his blue lights because the vehicle matched the description in the bolo, but the driver kept going. He did not pull over. He kept driving down Blossom, and then he tried to make a left turn down a street called Saluda Avenue. However, if you look here, this is a very unique road. It's divided by a grassy median. There are 2 roads with the same name, one going in each direction, and it's very obvious to drivers typically which one you're supposed to travel down. I looked at the street view, and it's really obvious to me. There's no light at the first street. See? There it is. It's facing the opposite way. You would not turn left here. Besides, there's a one-way sign right here. This is the correct road that you would go down, except the driver didn't do that. The driver was going down the wrong way on the first road, on oncoming traffic. Right here. There's even white lines. The turn arrow's upside down. The cars are facing the opposite way. How would he not know? But then he finally comes to a complete stop on Saluda Ave, and granted, it was already pretty dark. We do have that dash cam video from the patrol car, and you see Officer Kraft following behind the car right here. Kraft immediately notifies dispatch of his find and signaled for the Impala to pull over. The whole exchange was recorded on Officer Kraft's body cam footage. However, what I find interesting is that the dash cam comes on first when you turn on the blue lights. The moment you hit the blue lights, it actually starts to record the previous minutes to catch the moment you turn on the lights, which is pretty cool. So it kind of jumps back in time and is already recording. So we get to see this vehicle make the wrong turn. Again, I don't know how he thought that he was going in the right direction. When he's pulled over, you already see him kind of rummaging around and moving in the car. So Kraft goes up to the driver's side of this vehicle. His primary goal at that point is to make sure everything's safe. He's also observing everything, and he too sees the driver moving around in the car. He didn't know Samantha's body had already been discovered, so he was hoping to find her alive inside the Chevy Impala. As soon as the officer got out of the vehicle to approach the car, he smelled marijuana. He gets up to the driver, and he's cooperative at first. He's kind of slumped back with his hoodie over his head, but he's answering all of Kraft's questions. Officer Kraft asked the driver for his license, but the driver didn't have it. And the driver actually scoffs. If you listen carefully, when Kraft says, "Why don't you have your license?" the driver says something about him leaving it at a club, but he gets very defensive right away.
What's going on, sir? You got your license? You got your license on you? I'm also Kraft, Columbia Police Department K9. No license on you. Why not?
When the officer inquired about who was smoking, the driver replied that he was, but it was before he left his house.
Who's smoking the marijuana?
I had smoked some earlier, sir, when I was at home.
All right.
Feeling uneasy, Officer Kraft asked the driver to step out of the vehicle. The driver was still cooperative. That is, until Officer Kraft noticed his hands were in his pocket.
All right, man, you got to step on out, man. All right, here's the deal, man. I pulled your car over because it matches the suspect. Get your hand in your pocket. What are you, crazy?
Having no idea whether the driver of this Impala was about to take out a weapon, Officer Kraft ordered him to remove his hands from inside his pockets. And once the driver did that, Officer Kraft started to explain why he pulled him over, but the driver began to run. And Kraft ran after him, yelling for him to stop. Where do people think they're going to go to when they run? I'm really curious. Like, why run? They have all your information, right? Because you left your vehicle behind? So it makes you look extremely suspicious to run.
Get over here. Hey, get over here.
As the driver fled, Officer Kraft called for backup and described his attire, his hoodie, his sweatpants. Watch carefully. As Kraft is trying to explain why he pulls him over, the driver puts his hands in his pockets, which is one of the scariest things an officer can encounter, by the way. This person may have a weapon on them. So Kraft tells him to take his hand out of his pocket. The driver starts to turn, and Kraft tells him to get over here, and then he takes off running, with Kraft trying to keep up unsuccessfully. But within moments, the backup arrives on the scene and runs after the suspect. Officer Kraft returns to the Chevy Impala. Other officers were called, as well as that canine. Kraft goes back to the car because there was another occupant inside in the passenger side of the car. That's why he was asking who's smoking, because there's two people in there. The woman who was now outside the car was being questioned by one of the other officers on scene. She was standing there near the front of the car providing officers with information. Now, Kraft wanted to make contact with this person because he didn't know who this driver was or why he would run. But because Officer Kraft smelled that marijuana when he pulled them over, he had probable cause to search the vehicle. He did search the interior of the vehicle and found a rose gold cell phone between the driver's seat and the center console. And he was also able to determine that there were remnants of marijuana on the driver's side floorboard. He located a set of keys with a pink key ring on it inside the car as well. He took them and he placed them on top of the Impala along with that rose gold iPhone. Kraft scanned the back seat and he opened the trunk, but he didn't do a complete search because this was not the time to do that. He could tell something happened in this car. He needed professionals to be called in because there was a significant amount of blood. There were footprints on the windows. There were cleaning supplies, bleach in the car. It was a crime scene, and he needed a crime scene tech who was specialized in this area of expertise to analyze and preserve the evidence. A second officer arrived at the scene. When Officer Kraft asked him what kind of phone Samantha had, he wanted to know because his initial thought was that the rose gold iPhone belonged to her. And on the keychain, they noticed a USB drive, and they wondered if this might be something a college student would carry. He knew the missing girl was a University of South Carolina student. I'm trying to give you information from all directions, everything that's going on. So while this is going on, Officer Justin Asia had hurried that way when he heard the call, and he was the one that intercepted the driver on foot. He was able to catch up to him and arrest the driver around 2:36 a.m. Running from the police is an arrestable offense. So he frisked the driver for weapons and none were found. The officers were evaluating the situation and trying to gain info about why this man ran. The driver did state he was sick, that he had the flu, and that he was having trouble breathing, so they did have to call the EMTs to come check him out. That's protocol. Safety first, it's a big priority. So the officers let the driver sit down so that he could catch his breath and he could breathe better while they were waiting for the EMTs to get there. And this is the point where they also read him his Miranda rights. But the driver refused to answer any questions, even a yes or no about whether he understood the Miranda rights, but he would not answer. But that's something he did need to answer. But after that, not speaking is his Fifth Amendment right. But he didn't even respond to the EMT's questions when they were trying to check him out and his vitals were being taken. At one point, the driver is just laying on the ground looking like he's having issues breathing. The officers just think, yeah, he just has some issues because he was just running. So the officers start to rub his sternum per protocol, sit him up so he can breathe better, like I said, but the driver would still not speak to EMS workers. And it didn't really seem like there was anything wrong with him. They take him to the ambulance to get him fully checked out, but they were thinking this must be some kind of act, that he wasn't really hurt, especially because he's not talking. Then he finally says he wants to speak to an investigator. So investigator Lee Blackman was summoned to the 5 Points area. Blackman explained to this man that is now handcuffed in the back of a police vehicle that he was there to speak to him. The man asked the officer why he was being detained, and he told him he ran away from the police during a traffic stop. The man nodded and said he knew that. Investigator Blackman also told him that marijuana was found inside the car, which was enough to keep him in custody. Things that were confiscated were his phone, and bandanas were taken from his head at this time. The driver of the Impala refused to give law enforcement his name. So officers started taking pictures of him. They were trying to do facial recognition, scanning his fingerprints to determine who he was. And ultimately they find out that Nathaniel Rowland was his name and he was 24 years old. So while waiting in 5 Points for Nathaniel to be brought to the station, investigator Blackman asked him where he was the night before. Nathaniel told the investigator he had been at a party at an apartment near the university and slept in the Stadium Suites Hotel. He explains to the investigator that he found his car in the hotel parking lot when he woke up that morning. When Nathaniel opened the door, he said that his car was blood-stained, so someone must have borrowed it. Investigator Blackman walked over to the vehicle to inspect it, and he saw just how much blood had to have been in that car. His first thought was, this is where Samantha died. During Nathaniel's interrogation, investigator Blackman asked him if he had traveled to the 5 Points area the night before, and he told the investigator he was at a house party and he would not provide specific information about who he was with or where. Nathaniel also denied ever visiting New Zion, where Samantha's body was found. New Zion, as I explained, was a small town. It was not a place someone would consider dumping a body unless they were familiar with it. At this point, Blackman explained to Nathaniel that a young woman was abducted from 5 Points around 2 a.m. on Friday. Nathaniel refused to answer any further questions. They did collect a swab of suspected blood off of his shoe, as well as scrapings from under his fingernails. But before the investigator left the room, he told Nathaniel to reflect on the past 2 days and to tell the truth. Nathaniel asked the investigator what he was talking about before shaking his head and saying that he was just going to go to sleep. The investigator was determined not to get tunnel vision and to think, we have our man. Instead, law enforcement had to investigate and find out where Nathaniel was and to do their due diligence to ensure that Samantha was given the justice that she deserved. That's when they located the Uber driver who had been requested to pick Samantha up at 5 Points the night she went missing. His name is Marcus Williams. Marcus told investigators he was 49 years old, married, from Columbia, South Carolina, went to school there, worked for the city for 10 years until he was injured. That's when he began driving for Uber. All he said he had to do to get started was to send his driver's license, registration, and a copy of his insurance. He told them he had a charcoal gray Dodge Charger at the time. Then they do a background check and either approve or deny you, and he was approved and he began working. He drove his 2011 Dodge Charger. He had been driving for 3 or 4 months at the time that Samantha requested a ride. He accepted that ride and he drove out to 5 Points to pick up Samantha. He had a 5-star rating. His car was always clean, he always got good tips, and he was a good driver. And in case you're not familiar with Uber, don't be ashamed if you've never heard of it or you haven't taken one. I realize there are viewers who watch my videos from all over the world. Uber is a ride-share app. Anyone can sign up for free and begin requesting a ride. The only thing I think you need to provide is your legal name or your Facebook account, the last time I checked. Then all you do is open the app, put in the address of the destination you want to go to, and once the app connects with an authorized and approved driver that works for them, they get an alert and you get an alert with the driver's information. You usually get their name, the color of the vehicle, the model of their car, their rating, and you can even cancel if you want for whatever reason. But it's important not to do that frequently because it can reflect badly on your rating. Marcus heard that the 5 Points area was a very busy location for college kids, so he frequently worked there. He was actually just ending a ride from another person in the 5 Points area when he got another alert that Samantha needed a ride. Marcus said he was diligent. He always called the person right when he got the alert to let them know he was on the way. So he called Samantha when he was on Hardin and Divine, right here, and she did not answer. So Marcus circled around. He usually gave people 5 to 10 minutes as a grace period because, they're at bars, they may be cashing out, maybe they're talking, maybe they're walking slower, they've maybe had a few drinks. After the app realizes that you were at the destination and you've not picked up the rider, it will send an alert to cancel the ride. So as he circled again and again a couple times, he had to cancel. He said he never picked her up. Never, to his knowledge, had he ever seen her or had she ever been in his car. Marcus did give them a DNA sample and they let him go and they told him they would call him back in if they needed him. So using the information that Samantha's parents gave them, investigators searched her bank records. That was the next thing they wanted to do. And they realized that there were several attempts where someone was trying to use her ATM card at a couple banks. One was 45 miles away from Columbia, and twice at another bank in Sumter County. This was very early in the morning on Friday, 5:45 a.m. in Sumter and 6:48 a.m. in Columbia. With a search warrant, the investigators obtained CCTV footage from the ATMs, and they showed a man wearing dark clothing, gloves. He was clearly trying to conceal his identity. His hoodie was so tight around his face. Look at this. And his face was hidden by a mask. This is what they saw. And this man was unable to withdraw any money from the ATMs because he did not have the correct PIN. They zoomed in, and they can tell he's wearing a bandana with a money design on it. He's wearing a black jacket, gloves, a beige shirt underneath, and a black hoodie underneath this black jacket with a white drawstring and black Nike slides. Crime scene investigators begin searching the Chevy Impala and processing all of the evidence. Investigators were able to search the vehicle much more closely after they obtained that warrant. And first, they do notice the child locks were engaged, indicating that Samantha couldn't have escaped once she stepped into that car. Samantha would not have been able to open the doors or roll down the windows. The entire interior of this car was covered in blood. It had permeated the seats. Lieutenant Kristen Grant said that she had never in her life seen so much blood in the 25 years of being an officer, never. In Nathaniel's car, investigators found a footprint on a window, and it appeared as though whoever left it there was trying to kick it open. So they lifted those prints for analysis. Lab workers with SLED arrived early that morning to test the evidence they found in the Chevy Impala and obtain a DNA profile. The results confirmed what the investigators had suspected. The blood inside the Impala belonged to Samantha Josephson, and that footprint, that was hers as well. Clearly, she was fighting for her life. Meanwhile, investigators tried to access Samantha and Nathaniel's cell phones. They wanted to find out where they were that night. And it turned out Nathaniel and Samantha's phones traveled the same route out of Columbia, up Highway 378, toward where the hunters found Samantha's body in New Zion. The Columbia police chief gave Samantha's family an update, telling them they believed they had captured the suspect. And even though Seymour and Marcy were relieved, Marcy still felt like it wasn't real. She was waiting for Samantha to come home. Sydney, Samantha's sister, flew to South Carolina to attend a vigil that was held by the University of South Carolina in memory of Samantha. Their dad said, "I can't tell you how painful this is. Samantha was alone. She had no chance. None." He urged the students at this memorial to be vigilant when they were out late and to always travel in pairs, and I have to agree. I know it's hard. I've definitely taken rides alone, but I would say the same. Travel in pairs at the very least. Marcy told the crowd she would never come to terms with this. There was no time to sit and say goodbye or to hold Samantha's hand. Nevertheless, Marcy said she was choosing to remember Samantha as a beautiful girl instead of what happened to her in her final moments. When Samantha walked into a room, her friend said that everyone felt happier. Samantha's sorority sisters described her as the next Amal Clooney because they knew that she would excel in the field of international law. And Greg talked about how his girlfriend had impacted so many people with her positive attitude and her energy during her short stay on this planet. Investigators reviewed Samantha's autopsy results when the medical examiner was finished, and that report revealed just how much poor Samantha had been through that fateful night. She suffered over 100 stab wounds. The interesting and equally confusing thing about these wounds is that the medical examiner knew that they were from some sort of sharp object with a single blade, but others were made with something else, an unknown sharp weapon. It seemed to have parallel blades of some kind, and he thought, were there two weapons? The medical examiner was stumped. The wounds were small. They were about 2 inches deep, so 2-inch blades in length, but the double stab wounds were very close together and the exact distance from one another in every double wound of its kind. He scoured the internet, searching through thousands of photos on Google to try to find a knife with 2 blades. He knew that if they could find this unique looking weapon and they could match it to Samantha's stab wounds and locate it, they could find the killer. She had wounds everywhere, on her head, her neck, shoulders, arms, legs, even her feet. There were defensive wounds to her hands. The one in the palm of her right hand went all the way through to the other side. And this is most likely because she instinctively put her hand up to shield her face as this killer swung the weapon at her. Notably, one of the wounds was through her ear and it went into her neck. Those wounds in her neck were most likely the cause of her death. She did have a defect on the hyoid bone on the right side, but they believed it was from a stab wound, not strangulation. The neck wounds impacted the carotid artery and the jugular vein, and wounds of that nature would have caused a significant amount of blood loss. And this coincided with the amount of blood that was left behind in the black Impala. There was only an eighth of a cup of blood left in her body at the time. I want to show you how much this is on the screen. The human body usually holds 4 to 5 liters of blood, so about a gallon of blood. The medical examiner had a hard time getting enough blood for a toxicology test. This poor woman bled out. That is how Samantha spent her last moments on Earth, with a stranger who kidnapped her, locked her in a car, trapped her in this confined space, and attacked her with an unusual, sharp-bladed weapon hundreds of times. It's absolutely gut-wrenching to think about. I take Ubers all the time, most of you do too, to think that this poor girl innocently got into this monster's car hoping that he was taking her home safely, only to realize that she was living out her absolute worst nightmare. Seymour spoke with the prosecutors that were handling Samantha's case, and he asked for the death penalty for the killer. He said that he wanted to see him fry, but his family advised him that this wasn't the time. They had to think about Samantha. They had to plan for her funeral. That's not what Seymour wanted. He didn't want to bury his child. Samantha should have been at his funeral, not the other way around. So in the days following Samantha's murder, the University of South Carolina offered extended counseling hours and rideshare safety tips. There was a vigil at the West Town Center Lake Gazebo in New Jersey for Samantha as well. About 500 people showed up to honor Samantha. As mourners lit white candles, one of her cousins sang "I'll Never Love Again" by Lady Gaga. Greg, Samantha's boyfriend, told the crowd that he's always imagined himself coming here 10 years from now with Samantha and their friends and family. And now, that would never happen. He said there were no words for what happened. Samantha's funeral was at Congregation Beth Chaim, where she had her bat mitzvah. On April 5th, 2019, the Jewish community at USC honored Samantha with a Shabbat candle ceremony. I'm doing my best to try to pronounce these Hebrew words, but about 30 people were in attendance, and a rabbi led the attendees in the traditional dinner, and a symbolic donation to the charity was made and a reading from Psalm 23. Many students and organizations on campus held vigils for Samantha, but this ceremony was one that the Jewish faith lit candles every Friday evening for, in tradition to light the candles and perform good deeds in memory of those who have passed away. Samantha was very active in the Jewish community at the University of South Carolina. She attended many of these services and even larger events such as Rosh Hashanah. Uber also released a statement following Samantha's brutal murder. In an email sent to The State, a South Carolina newspaper, a spokesperson for the rideshare company said, quote, "Since 2017, we've been working with local law enforcement and college campuses around the country to educate the public about how to avoid fake rideshare drivers. Everyone at Uber is devastated to hear about this unspeakable crime, and our hearts are with Samantha's family and loved ones. We remain focused on raising public awareness about this incredibly important issue," end quote. Among the evidence found in Nathaniel's vehicle was an envelope. It looked like it had a shopping list on it. One of the items on the list, duct tape. And it said, "Tape whole body." Next was gloves, all black, flip phone, gasoline, matches, and then there's also a crossed out line where you can't decipher what was being written there. An eviction notice was also found in the glove compartment. It was written from someone named Maria Howard, and a Wendy's receipt from 6992 Garners Ferry Road from March 29th at 12:38 was found. So Investigator Fisher goes to that location to retrieve video, and the video shows Nathaniel Rowland in his car wearing a head covering, and there's a white sheet covering the headrest and the back seat of his vehicle. However, they can't see Samantha in the car. On April 3rd, while Nathaniel Rowland was still in jail on the unrelated traffic charges, investigators wanted to quickly obtain an arrest warrant for Samantha's murder. So SLED investigator Lee Blackman and an officer from Columbia PD drove to the address listed on that eviction notice, Maria Howard's. When they arrive at Maria's, they knock on Unit C, Maria comes to the door, and she's completely cooperative with police. They told her they found the eviction notice in Nathaniel Rowland's Black Impala. They want to know if she knew him, and if so, how. She tells the investigators that Nate is her boyfriend, and she agrees to go down to the police station. However, Maria does inform them she has not slept in a couple days. She pulled all-nighters at work at McDonald's, and she was pretty delirious. She told them that she would do her very best to provide them with as much information as she could in regard to what she knew about Nate. She was questioned for hours, but she was too tired to recall details. She needed sleep, so they agreed to let her come back in a couple days to re-interview her, and good thing they did, because she had a lot to tell them. This poor girl. Honestly, I feel so bad for people who get into these horrific situations on account of being a loving, caring person who gets involved with the wrong individual. There's going to be a lot to take in here, but this is what they find out. Maria Howard was 24 years old. She lived in Colombia for the past 10 years, and she moved there in high school, and then she went to college in Denmark, South Carolina. At that point in life, it was all about partying on a regular basis, and when she came back home, she would party at 5 Points on the weekends. She, just like Samantha and Greg, met Nate when she was at 5 Points with her friends one weekend. They were friends. They didn't just jump into a relationship, and they actually lost contact for a while, but they reconnected when he stopped by McDonald's when her shift had just ended back in the beginning of March. She was working at the McDonald's in Garnes Ferry across from Rosewood. And this was, like I said, in the beginning of March. He drove up through the drive-thru, and then he pulled up next to her, and he's like, "Hey, girl." And she couldn't believe it. She hadn't seen him in a couple years. So they chit-chatted for a bit. They exchanged phone numbers, and he asked her what she was doing that night. She explained that she had just recently moved into a new duplex, and she was just waiting for a ride home from a coworker. Well, Nate insisted that she let him give her a ride home. She didn't have a car, so she was used to getting rides from other people, and she knew Nate, so she accepted the ride. He took her back to her duplex in Mountain Brook, which was about 25 to 30 minutes away, and they hung out for a bit, and then Nate went home. But they definitely hit it off, and they were inseparable from that day forward. They started seeing each other every single day after that. They were dating at this point and in a sexual relationship. So Nate was there all the time, but he didn't live with her. He actually lived with his sister. However, Maria hated being home alone, so she was letting her cousin Aisha stay with her. But recall that eviction letter. Well, her cousin hadn't been following her rules. She wasn't cleaning, she wasn't taking care of things, and now that Nate was around, Maria wanted her out. She felt like her cousin had to go, so she typed up that eviction letter, and she was planning to get it notarized. Maria also had a 4-year-old daughter that lived in the duplex with her, but she spent a lot of time with her grandma, who was a school teacher. They would share responsibilities like taking her and picking her up from preschool. Now that Nate was in the picture, Maria would have him drive her to the preschool so she could go get her daughter and to run other errands, in addition to taking her to work at McDonald's and picking her up. And he would always do that for her, as well as just be there for her at night or in the morning, because like I said, she didn't like to be alone. However, they did just start dating, so Nate did still go out with his friends from time to time, especially to 5 Points. He referred to it as being lit. This was one of his favorite places to party. He would go out maybe a couple times a week, but Maria couldn't. She had to work a lot, and frequently she would pull double shifts. And she just wasn't interested in that life anymore. Instead, they would just hang out all day, watch TV, eat, but she wouldn't go out with him to bars together. The first couple weeks they were dating, she explained to investigators that Nate slept downstairs on the couch. Maria wasn't keen on letting him stay in bed with her, but as they got more serious, she finally began letting him sleep with her around the 3rd week they were together, which was around that 3rd week of March. Maria told investigator Blackman that on Wednesday, March 27th, 2019, Maria had reminded Nate she had to go to work at 7 a.m. the next day, and all of her work shirts were dirty. She didn't have a washer and dryer, so she needed to drive to her mom's house to use the washer, but her mom wasn't home. It was getting later, and Maria had other things to do that night. She didn't know how she was going to get her work shirt cleaned. And Nate said, don't worry about it, that he'd take it to his sister's house that night and have it for her in the morning. She and Nate spent the evening at her house watching TV until she went to bed around 12 or 1 that morning. At that time, Nate was downstairs watching TV, and investigators asked her what he was wearing. She says he was wearing a gray Nike hoodie shirt and navy blue sweatpants that were the windbreaker type. She expected him to come to bed when he was finished watching TV, But when she woke up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom, she could tell he wasn't there. He had gone out. She didn't know where. Maria gets up early for work around 5 a.m. She notices Nate did not come home the night before. She knew because the bed was the same exact way she left it. He never got into it, and he wasn't in the house, and his car wasn't outside. So she texted him at 5:31 saying, "Where are you at?" And there was no answer. She was pretty upset as time went on because he had promised to come pick her up, and had he not done that, she would have found another ride. She did not like to be late, and she didn't appreciate his inconsiderate behavior. She was stressing over the eviction with her cousin, not having enough money for rent, and she needed to get that shift. She was even texting a friend telling them that she was crying, thinking about how she was going to come up with her rent money in just a couple days. So 7 o'clock rolls around. Maria's now late for work. It's at least a 25 to 30 minute drive, and Nate hadn't shown up yet. So she texts him again at 7:01 saying, "Bae, I'm late as F for work." Still no response. And she's pissed. She calls her mom, letting her know that she may need a ride and that she was mad. And that's when she sees Nate's car pull in around 7:45 or so. She runs out there upset, asking him, "Where have you been? Where's my shirt?" And he doesn't even answer. Instead, he drives off saying, "I gotta go to my sister's to take my nephew to school. I'll be right back." But Maria's confused because at this point, she's upset. She knows his sister's house is like 30 minutes away. And then he would need to bring the nephew to school and then come all the way back to her. It made no sense. Then, about 10 minutes later, not enough time for him to do what he said he needed to get done, he pulls back into Maria's driveway with her shirt, and it's still wet. Almost like it doesn't even seem clean, almost like it was rinsed. What the hell is going on? She doesn't know. She doesn't care. She just wants to get to work. So she gets in his car, she puts the envelope containing the eviction letter into his glove compartment for safekeeping until he could take her to the bank to get it notarized. Maria then texts her mom with an update. It's at 8:03 in the morning. She says, "Baby tried. LOL. My shirt's still wet AF. He will not be washing clothes ever. Have a good day, Ma. Love you." To which her mom responds at 8:21, "LOL, girl. You could have done that at home. Why didn't you go to the laundromat?" And Maria responds at 8:48 a.m. saying that Nate didn't want to. Maria had also put her McDonald's uniform visor in the back window of the car the day before, so that she could just grab it and put it on as they drove to work. But she looks back there and she doesn't see it. So she asks Nate, "Where's my visor?" And this is when things got weird. He tells her that it's in the country. And she said, "Why?" And he said it had blood on it. And when she asked him, "Why would my visor have blood on it?" he told her to mind her business. She again asked him the same question, and again, he told her to mind her business. Now, luckily, Maria calls her boss, told her she's going to be late due to her outfit, and the boss said, "You know what? I can provide you with another hat." So then they stopped to get gas. And that's when Maria was actually able to get a minute to look at the car. She hadn't really been paying much attention to it, but she turns around and looks at the back seat, and it was odd. There was a white fitted sheet with like a blue design on it that was hanging over the driver's headrest and then draped across the back seat. Her daughter's baby seat was sitting on top of the sheet, kind of holding it down on the right passenger's back seat side. But what was even more shocking was that she saw what she thought looked like blood on the sheet, that it was actually seeping through from underneath, and she looked around and saw what appeared to be dry blood on the dashboard, on the side of the seats of the car. And as she's taken a better look and back, she realizes that despite the sheet being there, she sees a ton of dried blood on the seats that were not covered with the sheet. She's so confused and she's worried, but maybe there's an explanation. And then when Nate gets back in the car, she immediately confronts him asking, "Why is there blood all over your car? Did you hit a dog or something?" And again, he tells her to mind her business. Okay, this is odd. It did not make sense. But Maria's main goal was to get to work, and he finally drops her off and promises that he will be back to pick her up later. He said that he needed to go clean his car and take a nap. So Maria had noticed that he did look really tired, so she gives him her keys and she tells him to go to sleep and come get me later. But he never showed back up after her shift ended around 4 p.m. When the investigators asked her why she didn't call 911, Maria told them she was scared. She was fearful of what might happen to her or her child if she didn't mind her business. And she didn't exactly know what was going on. It wasn't uncommon to hit deers in that area. As a matter of fact, Nate's car had just been serviced for the exact reason just a few weeks before he started dating Maria. His ex, Destiny, actually hit a deer while she was driving Nate around in his car, and it destroyed the front bumper, which needed to be replaced. A coworker ends up bringing Maria home that Thursday evening, and once again, she's mad. She banged on the door of her own house hard like it was the police. And Nate comes down, he opens the door, and he looked like he just saw a ghost. He definitely had been sleeping, she could tell. So she goes inside, she starts getting ready to take a shower, and she notices that Nate still had on the same clothes he did from Wednesday. And she thought that was pretty nasty, so she said, quote, "Why haven't you washed your ass in a couple days?" End quote, to which he didn't respond. And this was being playful, but she was also pretty serious because it was obvious to Maria that Nate's clothing had blood on it. So when she gets out of the shower, she sees him outside cleaning his car, scrubbing it. When she gets closer, she notices it smells like chemicals like chlorine. But then she sees bleach. Bleach bottles are in the backseat of the car, and Nate had gathered up all of her cleaning supplies and he was using them to wash the inside of the vehicle. She tells Nate that she needs to get to an ATM because she needs to get money out for her rent and stop at her mom's, and she drives. She drives his car while he's in it, still cleaning the car. He's wiping it down with wipes while he's wearing blue surgical gloves as she's driving. And he's sitting there throwing these dirty rags into a grocery bag. She looks over and she doesn't want to, but she's kind of curious about why. So she asks him, "Why are you cleaning?" And again, he tells her to what? Mind her own business. She looks over a few minutes later and he's cleaning a knife-like item. And she's seen this item before, but she never saw it open like that. So it kind of looks like one of those retractable knives or something like that. As her eyes are kind of scanning everything in the car, she saw a rose gold iPhone in this little phone compartment on the center console. So she questions him about it because it looks like a female's phone. It's in pristine condition, even though he insisted he found it somewhere on the ground. Then he says, "You know what? I'm actually going to give it to you." But she didn't want it. She already had a phone and she liked Androids, not iPhones. So she goes, "Nah, I'm good. I don't need it." They head back to her house to pay her rent. Her mom was supposed to pick up her daughter, but she couldn't. So she tells Nate that they're going to have to go drive to go pick up her daughter. They had the booster seat in the back seat, like I had said. And Nate said he really didn't want her daughter in the car because there was blood, but they had no choice. They pick up Maria's daughter, they take her back to the house, and when she takes her out of the car, there is blood on her shoes. So Maria takes them off and she throws them into a closet. And that just shows you how much blood was inside this vehicle. He had already been cleaning it and there's still blood on it. Later that evening, 2 of Nate's friends show up and they're all gonna go out to 5 Points around 12 in the morning. As they're leaving to get into his car, Maria literally asks him, "Why would you drive in a car with blood in it?" He never responded. But Maria told investigators she finally put it all together. After Samantha had gone missing, she did see her picture on the news. It was about a day later, and then they showed a clip of the black Impala, and she was stunned. It all made sense to her now. The blood, Samantha being missing, it was Nate's car. She still didn't call the police. She was scared. She couldn't even go to work. She called in and pretended her daughter was ill just so that she could pull herself together. The police came to speak with her, and that was the day that she pulled that double shift over 12 hours, and she told them, "Please, I've got to get some sleep." So that is where we are right now. This was the second interview, and she told them everything. And this time, she let them know every detail she could remember and let them look at her phone. And they took it for a while to have it analyzed. Finally, they gave it back to her, and she gave them a sample of her DNA. But according to Maria, because Nathaniel used tons of cleaning supplies to clean the car, Maria said she thought it would blow up if she lit a cigarette. Maria also tells them that there's a trash bin in the back of her duplex, and Nathaniel had been throwing things in there from his car. The investigators were very interested in this information. So when investigator Blackman asked Maria where the garbage bin was, she said, "It's still there." The sanitation workers had not picked it up yet. So Maria was informed that a search warrant had been issued for her home and a crime scene unit was going to be sent out there to gather evidence. They located a dumpster in the back of the duplex that anyone can access just by walking around the building. Inside this dumpster, Investigators found cleaning supplies, bloody sheets, towels, gloves, and the worst thing is that they find a multi-purpose tool. It had blood and hair on it. We're going to talk about that in a moment. They also find clothing like a beige dress shirt in Maria's trash bin, and in one of the garbage bags was a leather jacket with marks on the arms, scratch marks. Investigators are convinced that Nathaniel had that coat on when he was stabbing Samantha in the backseat of his car, and that those marks were from Samantha's fingernails. Investigators noticed that this multi-purpose tool, which my boyfriend is calling a Leatherman. I'm going to show you what a Leatherman is first, and then I'm going to get into this tool. Well, this tool had a unique double blade. They believed they had just found the murder weapon, and tests were conducted on all the items that were discovered. Samantha's DNA matched the blood found on these items. And this weapon is actually the scariest weapon I have seen in all of the cases that I've talked about, and I'm not kidding. Maybe since it's smaller, and you may disagree, but if someone were to swing that around, it's such a tiny weapon. Can you imagine how fast it could be jabbed into your skin? How many times this was used on Samantha? It terrifies me. It's so portable. It folds up. It's just this little hidden multi-use tool that can turn into a murder weapon in a second. Look at it. It just looks scary. The blades, they're bent at the ends, which signified that it had been used with a great amount of force. They notice it can also be opened up like this. That's how it made the single blade wounds, and when closed, it makes double. Without a doubt, this was the murder weapon. During an analysis of Samantha's phone on March 29th, an analyst found that it was powered on at a business that bought and sold used cell phones. It's called Cellular City. Investigators drive out to Cellular City in Columbia, and they ask the manager if they could look at the CCTV footage from that day. Nathaniel's black Chevy Impala is spotted pulling into a parking space outside around 11 a.m. on the 29th. And as investigators watch the footage, like Maria had said, there was that white sheet draped over the back seat, and they could see bloodstains on it. The CCTV footage from inside Cellular City showed Nathaniel holding Samantha's rose gold cell phone when he's entering. The clerk then examines the phone. He plugs it in. He sees a white woman on the lock screen. Suspicious to him. And let me be clear, it's because he's not a dummy. He's seen people come in with stolen phones. Nate doesn't seem to know much about the phone. He just says he found it or it was given to him. And the clerk decides, I'm not buying it. Upon viewing this video, investigators are able to identify Nathaniel as the same man who tried to use Samantha's bank card at those ATMs. He was wearing the same clothes, and they were the same clothing found in Maria Howard's trash can, his girlfriend's trash can. In light of all the evidence that investigators had, they were able to charge Nathaniel Rowland with kidnapping and the murder of Samantha Josephson. Nathaniel denied being involved in Samantha's murder. One of his cousins, Trey Elmore, spoke to the state and said Nathaniel passed out at a party the night before the murder. He didn't believe his cousin had anything to do with this crime. He doesn't think that his cousin was the one driving the Chevy Impala that picked Samantha up in 5 Points. Trey felt that the police only thought it was Nathaniel because he ran from the cops when he was pulled over. Also speaking up in Nathaniel's defense was his own father. Nathaniel's father said that his son woke up without his keys, so someone else must have driven his car. In a statement to the news, his dad said that Nathaniel found the keys to his car in the parking lot and that the vehicle was covered in blood. But the assertion of Nathaniel's innocence didn't matter much because he was charged at the end of April with possessing a weapon during a violent crime. And there were way too many connections between Samantha and Nate for this to have been anyone else in the investigators' minds. Not to mention, they found a connection between where the body was discovered and where he grew up. It turns out Samantha was left in that desolate, wooded area, and it was only 2 miles from Nate's parents' home in New Zion. Nate's ex, Destiny, told investigators that he had taken her out there at least 3 or 4 times that year to meet his family. He knew that area. And remember what the DNR worker said? The area where Samantha was found was like a needle in a haystack. Only a local would know their way around there. Nate was a local. And speaking of Mr. Morris, the DNR worker that was called out by the turkey hunters, well, Mr. Morris knows the Rowland family because he lived right across the road from them on Renegade Trail, and this is in close proximity to where the body was found. Look, Mr. Morris has lived there his whole life for 60 years, and Nate's family only lives 2 houses away. He'd had many chances to speak with the Rowland family. There are only a few houses nearby. It's mostly fields, so make no mistake about it, Nate knew this area. Samantha's parents, Seymour and Marcy, attended the University of South Carolina's commencement ceremony in May of 2019. They accepted Samantha's degree on her behalf. She was honored during the graduation ceremony by the USC president, Harris Pastides. He said, quote, "I'd like to take a moment to recognize and honor the life and the legacy of Samantha Josephson, our cherished 21-year-old senior political science major whose life was taken tragically from us. Samantha's family is here with us today, and she'll receive her college degree directly after this ceremony." In memory of Samantha, a seat was also reserved in the first row, draped in robes. And one of Samantha's favorite instructors, Daniela James, said, "It's definitely very hard not to see her there with the other thousands of graduates. She should be here. Her spot is there." Following his speech, the university president counted to 3 and then asked, "What's my name?" And everyone responded, "Samantha Josephson." Samantha was not the only University of South Carolina student to receive a posthumous degree in 2019. In fact, Samantha wasn't even the only murdered student who was supposed to graduate from the University of South Carolina that year. On March 26, 2019, Evan Gaines was shot and killed less than a mile from the university upstate campus. He passed away later that evening. In November 2019, 5 people were charged with Evan's murder. He was a good person with a desire to work in business management, and he had not been forgotten. Even though that arrest can't bring Evan back, it will help his family get justice that they deserve. Within weeks of Samantha's murder, Columbia Mayor Steve Benjamin called for stronger regulation of ride-sharing companies. He proposed policies such as city inspections of rideshare vehicles, designated pickup points, and adequate lighting at those locations. Additionally, the proposal stipulated that ride-sharing cars should not use child locks unless a child was in the vehicle and the child's parents approved. Seymour and Marcy appeared on ABC's Good Morning America in April of 2019, and they endorsed a proposal passed by South Carolina House requiring Uber and Lyft drivers to display illuminated signs to make it easier for them to be identified. However, Seymour and Marcy said there were other safety measures that they would like to see added. Uber and Lyft provide customers with a description of the car picking them up and their tag number, which we know they do now. However, a few states do not require front license plates, including South Carolina, so he wasn't advocating making it a law across the board, but anyone working in the rideshare industry should have a license plate on their car. On Good Morning America, Seymour said he would like to also see a QR code in the windshield of vehicles. He said the rider should be able to scan the code and confirm that it was their car. In June of 2019, the South Carolina legislature passed a law that required all drivers for rideshare services to display their license plates on the front and back of their vehicles. While waiting on their Uber in Hilton Head Island, South Carolina, 2 tourists got into the wrong vehicle 3 months after Samantha's murder. After they realized the driver was heading in the wrong direction, they told him they were going to call 911, and the driver grabbed their phone. He suddenly stopped the car, and both of the tourists were able to escape. However, the driver exited the vehicle and tried to approach them. The tourist was able to grab the phone and call 911, and the driver fled in his car. In January of 2020, Uber introduced a new safety feature that enabled users on the app to give a PIN to the driver before starting the ride. Seymour thought Uber's new features was a great start, but a bill named Sami's Law was passed in honor of Samantha 6 months later. Upon approval, the bill would ban vendors other than ride-sharing companies from selling vehicle signs to prevent driver impersonation. Furthermore, the Government Accountability Office would be required to investigate how background checks were being conducted on the rideshare drivers. Unfortunately, at that time, Sami's Law failed to advance to the Senate by the deadline, so it was filed again this past December. After passing the House again, the bill was sent to the Senate, and just this month, on January 6, 2023, President Biden signed Sami's Law into effect. Going back to May 2021, it was announced that Nathaniel Rowland's murder trial would take place in July. The date kept getting postponed because of the pandemic. Seymour and Marcy promised to always be at the trial as a family unit to ensure that they got the justice that their daughter deserved. Marcy was nervous. She didn't know what to expect. She didn't want to hear the details about Samantha's murder. It was going to be tiring and stressful for them to relive everything. The state circuit judge, Clifton Newton, presided over the case. And on July 20th, 2021, solicitor Byron Gibson began the prosecution's case by stating that March 28th, 2019 was supposed to be a celebration for Samantha and her friends. However, they were unaware that the defendant, Nathan David Rowland, had his sights set on her. According to Byron Gibson, all the evidence presented to the jury pointed to Nathaniel Rowland as the person that kidnapped and murdered Samantha. Therefore, he urged the jury to convict him. Alicia Good from the public defender's office said that there was no evidence that Nathaniel kidnapped and killed Samantha. DNA from Nathaniel was not found on Samantha's clothes, or her fingernails, or her ankles, and he had no marks on him at all. So how could he have done such a brutal crime? In order to secure a guilty verdict in Nathaniel's case, the prosecution knew that they needed Maria Howard's testimony. And despite her fears for her child's safety and her own, Maria chose to testify for the prosecution and against Nathaniel. She told the jury everything we know, how she did not find Nathaniel the next morning, and there were 7 hours unaccounted for. As the prosecutor showed Maria the multi-purpose tool containing Samantha's blood, as well as Nathan's DNA, Maria said she recognized it as something that he had carried before. It had been in his possession, but she had never seen it open. She explained to the jury that she did not call the police due to her fears. However, once she spoke with investigators, she started to receive death threats, and she ultimately lost her job because of this. Later, both Seymour and Marcy thanked Maria for testifying. Video surveillance of the black Chevy Impala recorded on the night that Samantha was abducted was shown to the jury, but the driver couldn't be identified. O'Shamar Williams, the owner of Cellular City, though, he was called to the stand by the state, and several cameras inside and outside of the store captured this man with the cell phone that entered the shop on the day that Samantha disappeared. When the prosecutor showed that footage to him and asked him if he recognized the person who tried to sell that cell phone to him, and if he was in the courtroom that day, he said yes, and he pointed to Nathaniel Rowland. That is an eyewitness. That puts Nate in possession of Samantha's phone. Kimberly Mears, a latent fingerprint analyst, determined that Samantha's footprint was the match to the one investigators found inside the right window of Nathaniel's black Chevy Impala in the back seat. DNA experts testified that the blood in the back seat was also that of Samantha Josephson, and the blood that was found on the back of Nathaniel's shoes and sock was also Samantha's blood. However, on cross-examination, the defense attorney did get this blood analyst to admit that there were several items in the vehicle that contained DNA from unknown individuals, which wouldn't have been unusual considering there could have been other passengers in that vehicle over the last few months. However, did that raise reasonable doubt? A former cell phone location expert with SLED testified that Samantha's phone traveled with Nate's after 2 a.m. on March 29, 2019. He said that Samantha's phone stopped moving at some point, and Nathaniel's phone continued to the area of New Zion, where the hunters found Samantha's body. What's more damning is that Nathaniel's cell phone was also traced to where the ATM cards were being used at those banks. If this isn't enough, I don't know what is. He's wearing a money bandana, though, in this picture, which was seen on him again 24 hours later when he was pulled over, and his fingerprints were on that list. Remember that list on the envelope they found that also had Samantha's DNA on it? Her blood was on it. A handwriting analyst came in with examples of Nathan's actual handwriting, and it matched the letters that were found on the envelope. It matched the words. Not to mention, they found a black beanie in Nathaniel's trunk with the words cold-blooded on it. He was wearing this in the video footage at the cellular store. It's like the scarlet letter, or letters spelling out who the killer is. Cold-blooded Nathaniel Rowland. That hat was tested, and it was positive for Samantha's DNA. The defense rested without calling any witnesses of their own. And as I was reading some of the comments while watching this trial, there were a lot of them that said they wanted to make sure, they wanted to check to see if the defense attorneys actually had law degrees and licenses to practice, because some of their questions made them look like they were working for the prosecution. And I have to say, I did notice some very interesting tactics, to say the least. Like when they cross-examined The investigator, Todd Shank, the crime scene investigator that examined Samantha's body and testified to very graphic details about what he found, normally a defense attorney would avoid a witness retelling this graphic testimony so that the jury would soon forget it. Instead, she had him rehash it all over again. And nothing he said was helping Nate's defense, I can tell you that much. However, the defense did argue that these unidentified DNA samples that were taken from the car were significant, and that there were mixtures of DNA that didn't include Nathaniel, that he didn't have any marks or cuts, nothing. However, I want to remind you that his jacket did have scratch marks on it. The defense also argued that just because Samantha's blood is in his car, and he tried to sell her phone, and tried to use her ATM card, and that his clothing had blood on it, and his phone was tracking with hers, and his phone was being used near where the body was found, doesn't mean he was the killer. Huh? Please make it make sense. And they really couldn't. Jurors were sent home and asked to return the next morning for closing arguments. It took less than 2 hours for 7 women and 5 men to decide Nathaniel Rowland had murdered Samantha. He was found guilty of all 3 charges. And during the sentencing phase, Samantha's parents and sister expressed their anguish. Sydney said that nothing could bring her sister back. Nothing, she says, will ease her family's pain and heartbreak. Marcy said she didn't have time to tell Samantha everything she wanted to. There wasn't time to kiss her goodbye. She called Nathan pure evil and hoped that he felt Samantha's pain. In the end, the prosecution decided not to seek the death penalty, and Samantha's family reluctantly accepted their decision. Seymour definitely fought them on it up until the last month. He wanted Nathaniel Rowland to be executed. In his victim impact statement, Seymour explained that he had contemplated taking his own life several times in those 28 months that he was waiting for the trial. Seymour told his daughter's murderer that he had taken his baby and he wished that he could inflict the same pain that Nathaniel inflicted on Samantha on him. Seymour begged the judge to please give Nathaniel a life sentence. He never wanted him to see the light of day again. What was sad to me, and you might feel differently, but Nate's mom spoke on his behalf in his defense. She claimed that her son did not commit the crime, but the judge stopped her. He told Nathaniel's mother there would be no claims of innocence. The jury convicted Nathaniel, and that was that. But once again, his mom spoke and described her son as caring. And then Nathaniel's mother said, I know my son didn't do this. And the judge stopped her again. He said, this is not the time to express any claims of innocence. He told Nathaniel's mother that she was not a witness and he'd had enough of the claims about what Nathaniel hadn't done. Nathaniel's mom just looked defeated. And she returned to her seat after saying her son was a good and respectful child. It pains me that parents have to go through this. I don't blame killers' family members in cases like this. It's devastating for them too. They do lose their child as well. You don't just stop loving your child. You may hate what they did and you may despise them, but you can still love them. It's a very hard situation to go through, and I feel for that poor woman. Judge Clifton Newman asked Nathaniel to stand in front of the court for sentencing, and he was asked if he had anything to say. And he said, quote, "What I know and what I think really doesn't matter. I just wish the state would have done more in finding out who the actual person was instead of being satisfied with detaining me and proving my guilt. If they would have done research in certain areas," and then the judge cut him off. The judge believed Nathaniel had no remorse at all for what he had done. In response to whoever asked him for leniency on behalf of the defendant, Judge Newman said, "That's not in his DNA." He sentenced Nathaniel Rowland to the State Department of Corrections for the remainder of his life without the possibility of parole. Since Samantha was murdered, Seymour quit his job and now works full-time at the What's My Name Foundation that they founded to commemorate Samantha's life. It's named this way because you should always ask the rideshare driver what your name is before getting inside. They should know, and if they don't get inside. I'm guilty of kind of asking as I'm getting in, don't. Don't step foot inside a vehicle without the driver saying your full name. If that door closes, it could be too late. The mission at What's My Name is to raise awareness of ride-sharing safety using the acronym SAMI, S-A-M-I. They urge riders to stop, ask, match, and inform. According to What's My Name, stop and plan. Before you request a ride, think about where you're headed and review the safety features in the app so you know how to use them. Ask your driver, "What's my name?" to confirm they have booked a trip with you through the ride-sharing app. Match the car's make, model, and license plate with the one displayed in the app. Inform and share the details of your trip with a friend. Utilize the Share My Status function in the ride-sharing app. This case changed my life, or at the very least my actions. I just took an Uber from the airport from my trip to Florida, and I remembered Sami. I asked, "What's my name?" It was raining and I really just wanted to get inside, but I waited and I confirmed that they had the right name before I closed that door behind me. In that moment, I thought about Sami's last night on earth. It made my ride almost unbearable, especially as a mom, because I kept asking why. Why was she taken the way that she was? Did Nate plan this all along? I had so many questions that'll never be answered. So many things were going through my head. I know in my heart and from all the evidence that Nate is guilty 100% without a doubt in my mind. But I can't help but wonder, was this his plan from the minute he left Maria's? Or was this his plan when he saw Samantha standing all alone at the curb? Or was it the minute that she tried to get into that other car before he pulled up? When was this murderous plan set in motion? Was it the minute Samantha mistakenly got into his car that Nate began to think evil thoughts? Was his plan really to kill Samantha, or was it sexual in nature at first? Because right after he dropped her at that location out in New Zion, he literally took his phone and went to an adult website, if you know what I mean, and he watched videos. So you tell me. And were the child locks already engaged due to Maria's little 4-year-old that was always driven around in the back of that car? Or did Nate hit that button when Samantha closed that door? Does it even matter? No, it doesn't. But the questions still remain in my mind. When did Samantha realize Nate wasn't her Uber driver? The app shows you everything. She had to have known. Did she begin to scream or try to escape, and that's when Nate decided to grab this weapon? How did he manage to get her phone away from her and turn it off? I imagine being in such close quarters and Nate wielding a knife and Samantha being forced to turn over her phone. It was in that moment he shut it off, when they were in the Rosewood area, when it stopped tracking, and he drove to a place he knew he could go undetected, somewhere in the middle of nowhere. Is that where the altercation really took place? I just can't imagine Samantha sitting there and letting him drive for an hour without putting up a fight. What do you think? I'd really like your thoughts. Please, as usual, be kind and compassionate. We can have a mature and valuable conversation in the comments without hatred or being too judgmental. That's always a good thing. And once again, thank you so much for giving Samantha your time today and listening to her story. And remember her anytime you're using a ride share app. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in my next video.